The village of Ashwood was quiet when the sun went down. Most people had already closed their shutters and locked their doors for the night. The last of the market sellers had packed their carts and gone home. The old baker had put out his fire. The blacksmith had hung up his tools. One by one, every light in every window went dark, and the village settled into the deep silence of a cold autumn evening. That was when the drake appeared at the edge of the road. It was small. Much smaller than anyone would expect a drake to be. It was no bigger than a large dog, with pale green scales that had gone dull from cold and exhaustion. Its left wing dragged behind it along the dirt road, torn near the joint where the thin membrane had been ripped clean through. Every time the wing caught on a stone or a root, the creature let out a soft sound. Not a roar. Not even a growl. Just a small, tired whimper that disappeared quickly into the night air. Its back right leg was worse. There was a deep cut just above the ankle, and the blood had dried dark against its scales. It walked with a heavy limp, putting as little weight on that leg as it could. Every few steps it stumbled. Every few steps it stopped, breathed slowly, and then kept moving. It did not stop moving. That was the thing about it. No matter how much it hurt, it did not stop. The drake had been moving for a long time before it reached Ashwood. It did not know how long. It only knew that it was cold and that the cold made everything hurt more. It knew that its wing would not open the way it was supposed to. It knew that its leg burned with every step. And it knew, in the way that young creatures know things without being taught, that it needed help. It had looked for its mother. It had called out in the low rumbling way that drakes call to each other across long distances. But no answer had come back. The forest had been quiet. The hills had been quiet. And so the drake had followed the smell of wood smoke and cooked food and the distant sound of voices until it found the village. It went to the first door it came to. The house belonged to a farmer named Ed. Ed was a big man with a loud voice and very little patience for anything that surprised him after dark. The drake scratched at the bottom of his door with one small claw. It waited. It scratched again. The door swung open and Ed looked down with a lamp in his hand. For one moment he just stared. Then he shouted, grabbed a broom from beside the door and swung it hard. The drake stumbled back off the step and landed on its injured leg. It let out a sharp cry of pain. Ed did not wait to see if it was hurt. He slammed the door so hard the whole frame shook. The drake sat in the dirt for a moment. Then it got up and moved to the next house. The second house belonged to an older woman named May. She opened her curtain and looked out when she heard the scratching. She saw the drake sitting in the pool of light beneath her window, its torn wing folded awkwardly against its side, its big pale eyes looking up at her. May pressed her hand to her mouth. She was not a cruel woman. But she was afraid. She let the curtain fall back and did not open the door. The drake waited. Then it moved on. It tried the house with the red fence. The man inside heard the scratching and threw open the window and shouted for it to go away. It tried the house at the corner where the two roads met. A woman cracked the door, saw the scales, and shut it again before the drake could make a single sound. It tried the narrow house with the flower boxes. No one answered at all, though the drake could hear quiet movement inside and knew someone was there. Door after door. House after house. The drake was not angry. It did not understand anger the way older creatures do. It only understood that it was hurting and that it needed warmth and that every place it went, the warmth was taken away before it could reach it. Each door that closed felt like the cold getting a little heavier. Each time it had to push itself back onto its feet and walk to the next house, its leg hurt a little more. But it kept going. It did not know what else to do. Stopping meant the cold. Stopping meant lying alone in the dark on the hard dirt road with no one near and no warmth anywhere. The drake had been alone in the forest after it was hurt, and it knew what that felt like. It did not want to feel that again. So it dragged itself forward. One step. Then another. Its wing left a faint trail in the dust behind it. Its breathing had grown shallow and quick, the way breathing gets when a body is working very hard just to keep itself going. By the time it reached the far end of the village, it had tried nearly every house on the main road. There was one light still on. It came from a small cottage set a little apart from the others, near the old stone wall at the edge of the village. The light was warm and steady, the kind that comes from a fire that has been burning for a while. Thin smoke curled up from the chimney. The drake turned toward it. It did not let itself think about another closed door. It just moved toward the light, one slow step at a time, because the light was warm and warm was the only thing left that it wanted. Tom had not planned to be awake so late. He had meant to eat, clean up, and sleep early. It had been a long and difficult day. He worked at the edge of the village as a woodcutter, and that morning a thick branch had swung back and caught him across the forearm while he was clearing a fallen oak. It was not a serious injury. Nothing was broken. but the skin had split in two places and the bruising ran from his wrist almost to his elbow, deep purple and tender to the touch. He sat at his small table near the fire with a bowl of warm water, a strip of clean cloth, and a small jar of herb paste that his neighbor had given him some months ago for exactly this kind of thing. He worked slowly, cleaning the cuts carefully, wincing now and then but not making much noise about it. Tom was not the kind of man who made much noise about anything. The cottage was simple. One main room with a fire, a table, a chair, and a cot pushed against the far wall. A shelf with a few jars and tools. A hook near the door where his coat hung. It was small but it was warm and Tom kept it clean. He had lived alone there for 3 years and he had made a quiet peace with the solitude. The fire crackled softly. Outside the wind had picked up, pushing against the shutters in long slow gusts. Tom finished wrapping his arm, tied off the cloth and leaned back in his chair. He was just thinking about whether to bother heating up the rest of his supper or simply go to sleep when he heard it. A scratch. Very faint. Low down near the bottom of the door. Tom sat still and listened. He thought at first it might be a branch blown against the wood, or a stray cat looking for shelter from the cold. Then it came again. Slower this time. And underneath it, so quiet he almost missed it, a small sound. Not quite a cry. Something between a whimper and a breath. Tom set down his cup and stood up. He crossed the room, lifted the latch and pulled the door open. The cold air came in first. Then the sight of it stopped him completely. The baby drake was on his doorstep. Or rather, it had been trying to reach his doorstep and had not quite made it. It was collapsed with its front half on the stone step and its back half still on the dirt path, like it had used up every last bit of strength it had just to get that far. Its torn wing lay spread slightly to one side. Its injured leg was bent at an awkward angle beneath it. Its eyes were open and they looked up at Tom the moment the door swung wide. Tom did not shout. He did not step back. He did not reach for anything to drive it away. He just looked at it. He took in the torn wing. The dried blood on the leg. The dull and tired scales. The shallow way it was breathing, quick and uneven, like a creature that had been pushing itself far past the point where it should have stopped. He saw the way its eyes watched him, not with threat, not with anger, but with something much simpler than that. Something that any living creature carries when it has run out of options and knows it. Tom lowered himself slowly to one knee so that he was closer to its level. The drake flinched slightly. Its lip pulled back for just a moment, showing the edge of small teeth. Tom did not move back. He stayed exactly where he was, one knee on the cold stone, and he let the drake look at him. He kept his face calm and his hands still and he did not make any sudden movements. He just waited. After a moment the drake's lip lowered again. The teeth disappeared. Its breathing was still fast but something in its eyes shifted, just slightly, the way eyes shift when a decision is being made. Tom reached out one hand. Slowly. Palm open, facing upward, the way you might offer your hand to a frightened dog. He did not push it forward. He just let it rest in the air between them. The drake looked at the hand for a long moment. Then it dropped its head back down onto the step. Not in fear. More like it simply did not have the energy to hold it up anymore. Tom made his decision. He slid one arm carefully under the drake's chest, just behind its front legs. With his other hand he supported the injured leg, keeping it as still as he could. The drake made a low sound when he lifted it, a brief sharp note of pain, and its small claws gripped the sleeve of his shirt. Tom held on and stood up slowly, taking the weight without rushing, and he carried it inside. He set it down on the folded blanket he kept near the fire for cold nights. He moved the blanket closer to the hearth so the warmth would reach it directly. The drake lay on its side, breathing. Its eyes tracked Tom as he moved around the room, never leaving him, but it did not try to get up. Tom pulled his chair close and sat down. He looked at the torn wing. He looked at the leg. He looked at the small creature lying on his blanket in the firelight, scales flickering between green and gold where the warmth touched them. He thought about what Anne had said when she gave him the herb paste. She had said it was good for cuts that needed to close clean. Tom leaned forward and got to work. Tom started with the leg. He knew that was the worst of the two injuries. The wing was torn but the bleeding there had already slowed on its own. The leg was different. The cut was deep and it had not closed properly, probably because the drake had kept walking on it long after it should have stopped. The dried blood had kept it sealed for a while but the skin around the wound was swollen and warm to the touch, which was not a good sign. Tom got up quietly and went to his shelf. He took down the jar of herb paste, the bowl of water he had already used for his own arm, and a fresh strip of cloth that he tore from an old shirt he kept for exactly this kind of purpose. He brought everything back to the fire and set it down beside the blanket. Then he sat on the floor, cross-legged, so that he was low and close without looming over the drake from above. The drake watched every movement he made. Its eyes were pale gold in the firelight, wide and alert despite how exhausted its body clearly was. It had not moved from its side, but its head was lifted slightly off the blanket, tracking Tom with a kind of careful and tired attention. Its breathing had slowed a little since he brought it in. The warmth was helping, that much at least. Tom dipped the cloth in the warm water and wrung it out. Then he reached slowly toward the injured leg. The drake moved fast. Its head came down and its teeth snapped shut less than an inch from Tom's hand. Not a full bite. A warning. The sound of it was sharp in the quiet room, and Tom pulled his hand back on instinct, not in fear but in simple reaction. He sat back and looked at the drake. The drake looked back at him, breathing harder now, its small body rigid. Tom did not raise his voice. He did not stand up. He did not reach for anything to hold the creature still. He just started talking. He did not say anything important. He talked about the day. He talked about the oak tree he had been cutting and how the branch had swung back and caught his arm. He talked about the way the forest smelled in autumn like wet leaves and cold earth. He talked about the bread and had brought him 2 days ago that was still sitting on his shelf and was probably going stale by now. He kept his voice low and steady, the same tone all the way through, not soft in a way that sounded afraid but calm in a way that sounded like nothing in the room was a threat. The drake's breathing slowed. Its head lowered by half an inch. Tom kept talking. He reached out again, slower this time, and he did not go for the leg. He let his hand rest on the floor between them first. Just resting there. Not pushing toward the drake, not pulling away. Just present. He kept talking while he did it. The drake looked at the hand. Then it looked at Tom's face. Then it looked at the hand again. It did not snap. Tom moved the hand forward by a small amount and rested it lightly against the drake's side, just below the ribcage where the scales were smoother. He could feel the heartbeat through his palm. It was fast but it was steady. He left his hand there and kept talking and did not move again for a long while. Slowly, the rigidness went out of the drake's body. When Tom finally moved toward the leg again, he did it with the backs of his fingers first rather than his palm, letting the drake feel the contact before he applied any pressure. The drake flinched. Its lip pulled back. But it did not snap. Tom cleaned around the wound in small careful strokes, rinsing the cloth often, never rushing. Every time the drake tensed he paused and waited and then continued. Every time it made a sound he acknowledged it with a quiet word and kept going. The herb paste stung. Tom could tell by the way the drake's whole body went tight when he applied it, a long shuddering breath pushing out through its nose. He kept one hand flat against its side and talked it through, the same steady voice, the same calm tone. The drake pressed its head down hard into the blanket but it did not pull the leg away. Tom took that as trust. He wrapped the leg with a strip of cloth, not too tight, just enough to keep the paste in place and protect the wound. Then he moved to the wing. The tear was long but shallow and it had dried into a thin dark line across the membrane. Tom cleaned it with the same patience, the same slow hands, the same quiet voice filling the space between them. By the time he finished, the fire had burned lower and the room had grown darker and warmer at the same time. Tom sat back and looked at the drake. The drake looked at him. Then Tom remembered the stale bread on the shelf. He got up, cut off a piece that still looked reasonable and came back. He tore a small bit off and held it out on his open palm, his arm extended, giving the drake space to take it or leave it. For a moment nothing happened. Then the drake stretched its neck forward very carefully, and took the bread from his hand with the very tips of its teeth. It chewed slowly. Tom tore off another piece and held it out. The drake took that one too, a little faster this time. By the time the bread was gone the drake had shifted on the blanket so that its head was resting closer to Tom's knee than it had been before. Tom looked down at it. Its pale gold eyes were still watching him, but differently now. Quietly. Like the question it had been carrying all night had finally found something close to an answer. The first full week was the quietest. The drake slept most of it. That was what injured creatures did when they finally found safety. They stopped fighting to stay awake and they let the body do what it had been trying to do all along. Tom let it sleep. He went about his mornings quietly, keeping the fire going, moving around the cottage without making sudden noises, cooking his simple meals and making sure there was always something within the drake's reach when it woke up hungry. It woke up hungry often. Tom was not sure what drakes were supposed to eat. He tried a few things. Bread it had already accepted. He tried a piece of dried fish from his shelf and the drake ate that faster than anything else so far. He tried a bit of boiled potato and the drake sniffed it carefully and then ate it with what seemed like mild disappointment. He tried a raw carrot and the drake looked at it for a long moment and then looked at Tom as if questioning his judgment. Tom laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in the cottage in quite a while, and the sound of it made the drake's ears press flat for a second before slowly rising again. By the second week the leg had closed well. Tom checked it each morning, unwrapping the cloth, cleaning it gently, applying a fresh layer of paste. The swelling had gone down by the 4th day. By the 8th day new scale was already beginning to form at the edges of the wound, pale and soft at first, darker as the days passed. The wing was slower, but it was also healing. Tom kept it clean and did not let the drake open it fully until the tear had sealed enough to hold. The drake did not like that rule. It tested the wing every morning, stretching it slightly, feeling for where the resistance was. Tom would watch, and when the stretch got too ambitious he would reach over and rest a hand on the wing gently, and the drake would fold it back with a sound that was not quite a grumble but was close enough. By the 3rd week the drake was following him. Not always. Not every step. But when Tom moved from the fire to the shelf the drake would get up from the blanket and walk behind him. When Tom sat at the table the drake would settle on the floor beside the chair. When Tom went outside to bring in wood the drake would stand in the open doorway and watch him with its ears forward and its tail moving in a slow side-to-side sweep. It started doing other things too. Small things. Strange things. Tom had a habit of running his hand along the top of the shelf when he passed it, just a light touch, the way people do when they walk past something they pass 100 times a day. One morning he noticed the drake doing the same thing. Walking past the shelf and reaching up with the flat of its nose to brush along the wood in exactly the same way. Tom stopped and watched it. The drake continued to the end of the shelf, turned around, and looked at him as if nothing unusual had happened. Tom watched it more carefully after that. When Tom crossed his arms while thinking, the drake would fold its wings slightly inward. When Tom tilted his head to listen to a sound outside, the drake tilted its head the same direction. When Tom exhaled slowly through his nose after a long task, the drake did the same, a small steady breath pushed out with a low sound underneath it. It was not mimicry exactly. It was something more like learning. The drake was watching him the way a very young creature watches the thing it has decided to trust, absorbing the patterns, storing them away. Tom found he did not mind. Word had spread through Ashwood by the end of the 2nd week. It was a small village and small villages noticed everything. People knew that Tom had taken in the injured drake. Most of them thought he had lost his mind. Ron from the house with the red fence came by one afternoon and stood at Tom's gate with his arms crossed. He said that Tom was being foolish. He said that drakes were dangerous and that this one would grow, and when it grew it would be a problem for everyone. Tom listened to the whole thing from his doorway without interrupting. Then he thanked Ron for his concern and closed the door. A few days later and came by with more herb paste, which Tom genuinely appreciated, but she also stayed long enough to tell him that the village elders were talking about what to do if the drake became a threat. Tom thanked her for the paste and closed the door. An older man named Ted came by and said nothing at all, just stood at the gate for a while and looked at the cottage with an expression that was hard to read, and then walked away. Tom did not change anything he was doing. Then came the evening near the end of the 4th week. Tom was outside splitting a small amount of firewood before the light went. The drake was in the doorway behind him in its usual spot, watching. The sky was clear and deep blue and the first stars were beginning to show above the treeline. The drake heard it first. Tom noticed because the drake went completely still. Not the lazy stillness of a resting animal but the rigid locked stillness of a creature that has heard something it recognizes. Its head came up. Its ears pressed fully forward. Its pale gold eyes lifted to the sky above the far end of the village. Tom followed its gaze. At first he saw nothing. Just the darkening sky and the treeline and the first cold stars. Then he saw the shape. Vast and slow and circling. Too large to be any bird. Moving in wide deliberate loops above the rooftops of Ashwood as if searching for something specific below. The drake beside Tom made a sound he had never heard it make before. Low and long and trembling at the edges. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something that came from a place much deeper than that. Tom set down his axe and stood very still. The shape in the sky grew larger. Tom stood in his yard with the axe at his feet and watched it come closer. It moved in wide slow circles, each loop tighter than the last, descending gradually the way a bird descends when it has found what it was looking for but is not yet sure it is safe to land. The wing beats were deep and heavy, the kind that pushed air down in waves rather than just cutting through it. Tom could feel them in his chest from a distance before he could even hear the sound properly. The baby drake was no longer in the doorway. It had come out into the yard and was standing just behind Tom's left leg, its whole body rigid, its eyes locked on the shape above. That low trembling sound was still coming from its throat, steady and unbroken. Its torn wing, now mostly healed, was pressed tight against its side. Its tail was straight out behind it and completely still. Doors opened along the village road. People came out in ones and twos, drawn by the sound of those wing beats the way people are always drawn toward the thing they know they should probably move away from. Tom could see them at the edge of his vision, standing in their doorways, standing at their gates, faces tilted up. Someone down the road called out a warning to their children. A dog began barking and then went very quiet. The mother drake came down in the open space just beyond Tom's front gate. She was enormous. Tom had known she would be large. He had told himself to expect it. But knowing a thing and standing 10 feet from it were two entirely different experiences. She was 4 times the size of a draft horse at least, maybe more. Her scales were a deep and burnished green, darker than the baby's, with edges that caught the last light of the evening and threw it back in shades of copper and bronze. Her wings folded against her sides as she landed, each one the size of a sail, and the ground under Tom's feet shook with a single brief tremor when her weight settled. Her head swung toward the cottage. The eyes were amber. Bright and deep and very, very old-looking. Not the pale gold of the baby but a darker color, like firelight seen through thick glass. They moved across the yard slowly and then found the small drake standing behind Tom's leg and stayed there. The baby drake made a sound. It was different from anything Tom had heard it make before. Higher and faster and layered in a way that seemed to carry more than one feeling at the same time. It stepped forward from behind Tom's leg. Just one step. Then it stopped and looked up at the mother and made the sound again. The mother lowered her head. Not all the way down. Just enough that her eyes came level with the baby. She made a sound back, deep and resonant, something Tom felt more in his ribs than heard with his ears. The baby took another step forward. Then another. It was moving carefully, almost formally, the way creatures move when something very important is happening and some part of them knows it. Tom did not move. He stood exactly where he was and let it happen. The reunion was quiet. There was no dramatic sound. No great cry. The baby reached its mother and pressed the top of its head against the underside of her jaw, and the mother curled her neck down around it slowly, not quickly, not desperately, but with the careful and deliberate tenderness of a creature that has been searching for a very long time and is now choosing to be still. They stayed like that for a long moment. Tom felt something tighten in his chest and looked away briefly at the darkening sky, giving them the moment the way you give a private thing its privacy even when you are standing right next to it. Behind him along the road he could hear the village watching in complete silence. Then the mother drake lifted her head. She looked at Tom. He met her eyes. He did not look away and he did not step back. He stood with his hands at his sides in the cool evening air and he looked back at her steadily and waited. She looked at him for a long time. She looked the way a very intelligent creature looks when it is not just seeing a thing but reading it, taking in not just what is in front of it but what it means. Tom had the strange and certain feeling that she was understanding things about him that he had never said out loud to anyone. The arm he had used to carry her young inside out of the cold. The hands that had cleaned the wound without flinching. The voice that had stayed calm through every frightened snap and every long difficult night. She looked at all of it. And then she bowed. It was slow and it was deliberate and it was unmistakable. Her great head came down in a long steady movement and held there, low, the amber eyes level with Tom's chest. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath on his face. It was not a small nod. It was not a casual dip. It was a bow the way a bow means something. The way it means I see you. The way it means what you did matters. The way it means I will not forget. Tom bowed back. Simple and straight. The only response that felt right. She held the position one moment longer. Then she straightened, turned, and spread her great wings. The baby looked back at Tom once. Just once. Those pale gold eyes finding his for a brief and quiet moment. Then it turned and followed its mother into the air and the two of them rose above the treeline together and were gone into the darkening sky. Tom stood in his empty yard in the silence they left behind. After a while he heard footsteps on the road. He turned to find several of his neighbors standing at his gate. Ron was there. And was there. Old Ted was there. They were all looking at him with expressions he had not seen on their faces before. Not quite awe. Not quite embarrassment. Something between the two. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then and said quietly that she supposed the drake had not been so dangerous after all. Tom looked at her. Then he looked up at the sky where the two shapes had disappeared. He smiled and picked up his axe and went inside. And from that night on, no shadow ever passed over Tom's cottage without purpose. No threat ever came close to his gate. The sky above Ashwood was watched by something vast and patient and deeply grateful. And every creature that flew above those rooftops knew without being told that the small cottage at the edge of the village was not a place to trouble. not ever.